Now today I want to continue on the law of morality and what we talked about last time, Kant's categorical imperative. And just to recap, the categorical imperative says that you should act according to a maxim as if it were a universal law. So in order for an act to have moral worth, what it means is that you need to you have to act according to principles that you have a duty towards, such that those principles could will them as universal laws. And last week we talked about the shoplifting example, where if we want to ask whether shoplifting is morally good or morally bad, we have to see whether if we made it a universal law, that means if we allowed everybody to do it, what would happen. And what would happen, according to Kant, is that if everybody shoplifted, the store would go out of business, and then if the store was out of business, then nobody would be able to shoplift anymore. So it's contradictory in itself. So that's a negative case. That's more of asking, is an action bad? Now today I want to look at a little bit of the opposite case, which is, what is a good action? So one question is, should we help people? Is it good to help other people? Now, conventionally speaking, we would say, yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, helping other people is usually seen as a good act, and you are usually praised for doing such things. But under Kant's definition of morality, again, the categorical imperative, is it a good act? Well, let's make it into a universal law. What if everybody universally helped other people? What would the world look like then? Now, it might seem that that's a good idea, but let's look a little bit more. This means that you always ought to do an action. Again, the law of causation always applies. It never only sometimes applies. You can't always sometimes help people and not help people. If it's a moral law, according to Kant, it is always the case that you should help people. Now, a good example of this is the famous trolley problem case. Now, a trolley problem is, imagine a train, and you're on the train, and you have the option to pull a lever, which will stop the train. And coming up to the train tracks while you're riding on it, the train is going, there are two sections, so you can turn either left or right. On one section, there's someone that's tied down onto the tracks. So if you don't make any actions, then that person will unfortunately die. On the other side of the track, there's 3 people, let's say, that are tied to the tracks. So if you do turn the lever, then those 3 people will die. Now, according to, if we were to suppose that you always ought to help people as a moral law, then according to Kant, again, you must help the person. But in doing so, you're actually hurting other people by helping that person. And now we ask the question, can we make this action a universal law? Should we always pull the lever? But that's going to result in actually people dying, which is not a good case. According to Kant, the supposed law, you always ought to help people, doesn't add up, so it can't be a moral law. But it's also worth noting that we're not saying that you should never help people either. That can't be a universal law either. But maybe whether you should help people or not is just outside the bounds of morality according to Kant. So the obvious question I feel like that maybe we're all asking is, what is actually a moral duty? What is something that can be prescribed as a moral law that we can will universally into the world? One answer that Kant gives is that you should always treat other people or persons as an end in themselves. You should never treat them as a means. So for example, let's say I'm a craftsman, and I use wood as a means towards the end of building furniture so I can sell them and make a living. Now, wood isn't a person, but let's say that I ran a company and I used people as a means towards making money. Kant would say that this is actually immoral. And it's immoral because we're not treating the person as a means towards their own end. We're treating them as a means towards making money. Now, I can imagine this opens up a can of worms, especially in the time that we live with capitalism and people having jobs where they are treated as basically resources to fulfill a job in order to make the company successful. However, I feel like it's more complicated because there is a contractual agreement at the beginning of the employment where they do treat each other as ends. They uphold the agreement to basically make the other into a servant or a worker or a resource. So there is a point where someone agrees to accept the role as a resource. However, I'm not too sure what Kant would say about that.